Imagine if you owned a printing company and you're very successful and you've hired some employees to run it for you. And they get paid great salaries and you trust them and they're making you money. One day you show up at the company though and you find out that your employees are printing flyers at your expense. The problem is the flyers are attacking you. They're threatening your church, they're threatening your family, and they're encouraging people to support things you don't believe in. On the one hand, they're making you money, but on the other hand, they're attacking your values. What do? That's not a hypothetical if you're an investor today. We've invited into the Economic War Room a good friend, Justin Danoff. He's the General Counsel of the National Center for Public Policy Research and the Director of the Free Enterprise Project. Justin is here to help us understand how your money is being weaponized against you and what you can do about it. Welcome, Justin.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Kevin. It's a truly important topic in these cultural crazy times we live in.
No doubt. Well, let's talk a little bit about corporations and how they're supposed to work. First question, it's a public company. Who owns it?
The shareholders. So when a company decides to have an IPO, when they decide to go public, what they're doing is they're opening themselves up to a marketplace where investors then give their money so that company can grow its operations, expand into new branches, expand into new lines. So the benefit of that bargain is that the investors own the company. So Tim Cook does not own Apple. Apple's shareholders own Apple.
So who's supposed to govern it? How is it governed?
Sure. So publicly traded companies have to have a board of directors and a set of managers. And so what their job is to act as stewards of the investors. Again, it is not their money to use, it's the investors' money. That's the benefit of the bargain of going public. Some companies remain private because they want to be able to allocate how all of their funds are used internally. And that's totally fine. But when we're talking about large publicly traded companies, they have an obligation to their shareholders because they got the benefit of the bargain of other people's money. So they're supposed to be a good steward of their money. And it's not just an obligation in a colloquial sense. It's a very real legal obligation. They have a fiduciary responsibility under the law to act in the best interest of those shareholders.
So let's say you're a shareholder and you don't like the direction that the company is taking. What do you do about it? How do you respond to that?
Sure, so you have a couple different avenues. You can just contact investor relations because you're an investor. These companies all have investor relations offices that need to be responsive to the needs and concerns of investors. So you can start by doing that route. We take it a step further at the Free Enterprise Project, which I direct. We do a couple of things. We are shareholders in many large publicly traded companies that act against our values, our conservative, our Christian values on a daily basis. Many people would say, Justin, why would you invest in companies that offend your values? Well, that's exactly what you need to do if you want to engage with them. Because if you're not part of the conversation, if you're not an investor, they don't have to listen to you. So we invest in some of the most woke, the most left-leaning companies such as, Apple, Salesforce, Amazon, Facebook, Nike. So we can be the conservative voice in the room. And we literally go to the room. Pre-COVID, when the world was open, I'd attend dozens of shareholder meetings in person every year to ask CEOs very pointed questions because many of these folks are surrounded by yes men and they never hear hard questions. And also, many of them are surrounded by wholly liberal boards, so they operate in echo chambers. So they never hear what you and I believe, Kevin, unless I show up to the room and ask the tough questions. And that's one of the avenues that we use. Another great tool are shareholder proposals.
Okay, now what's a shareholder proposal?
Yeah, so at every annual meeting, let me back up. Every publicly traded company has to have an annual shareholder meeting. And at those meetings, there are 3 separate votes that take place. First, the shareholders get to vote on each of the board members' nominations. So each board of director member is voted on separately. That's one tranche of votes. The second tranche are proposals that are put on the ballot by management. Normally, these relate to which accounting firm they're going to use, say on pay votes where investors have a say on what the management level employees, such as the CEO and the CFO, how they're compensated annually. And then the third set of votes, those are shareholder proposals. So as an investor, the SEC has set up rules and regulations allowing shareholders, as small, by the way, as a shareholder owning only $2,000 of a publicly traded company stock, to file a resolution for the other investors to vote on at those meetings. And so that's where we engage at even a higher level than simply attending shareholder meetings. We file ballot measures for consideration for corporate proxy statements. We file anywhere between 15 and 20 resolutions in any given year.
So give us an example. I know you're doing this, but it's also being done by those on the radical left. Give us an example of a proposal that you might have put forward.
Sure. So when we take a look at some of these companies that have monolithically liberal boards, so we're talking about Apple, we're talking about Salesforce, we're talking about Facebook, I have filed what I call true board diversity resolutions. Look, when companies make overtly political and policy decisions, we think it would benefit these far-left companies to have another voice in the room. And so we filed resolutions saying, look, your boards are completely out of whack when it comes to balance in any ideological sense whatsoever. It's monolithically left. So when you nominate new board members, we think it's important that you consider viewpoint diversity so that you can have a balance and hear that if you take a certain action, you're going to offend 50% of your customers, 50% of your investors, and potential investors. If you're not having that dialogue, we think that, organizational leadership is going to suffer from groupthink, and that's one reason why companies do take so many far-left positions in our society, is because the boards are way out of balance in our Fortune 500 companies at this point, bending extremely to the political left. And so we're trying to interject some balance into the boardrooms. So those are some of the shareholder proposals that we filed. And I'll happily say that, while the most woke companies out there have pushed back on us, there are some Fortune 500 companies that have adopted our shareholder proposals, and that is their policy now, that when they nominate new board members, viewpoint diversity is at the top of the consideration for some major American companies now, based on resolutions that I have filed.
Well, that's fantastic, Justin. It's important for diversity. It's important to hear other sides. You'll get better performance as a result of that. So we're going to take a break, but when we come back, we're going to talk about the hottest trend in shareholder proposals, but why it may be dangerous for America. All right, before the break, we were talking with Justin Danoff, and we were talking about shareholder proposals that they put over that suggest ideological diversity. These left-leaning corporations ought to hear conservative voices because they know at least half of their customers are conservative. The problem is that the companies themselves are being pushed further and further to the left by shareholder proposals. And I want to talk with Justin now about the proposals related to something called ESG. Justin, what is ESG and how will it impact America?
Well, it's the latest corporate buzz phrase that means nothing. It's kind of like diversity and inclusion. These are just hollow things at this time. But ESG, it stands for environment, social, and governance. And so that's what it means. Those are the words. What it means in reality is whatever a particular liberal interest group happens to be pushing on that given day. Okay, they've co-opted these three words to push a policy and political agenda through the corporate arena because the left has realized quite effectively that corporations, just look at their so many corporations' recent support for Black Lives Matter. Corporations move way faster than the political process, right? Look at the policing bills in the House and the Senate. They're all caught up. They're moving slowly. Nothing's happening. But guess what? You can move corporations really, really fast on issues. It goes faster than the political process and faster than the legal process. And that's why left-wing activists use ESG shareholder proposals to try and change the culture, because they know you don't need to change a law to change the culture. And so every year, I said, at the outset that I file between 15 and 20 shareholder resolutions, and that's putting in a lot of work. The left has dozens and dozens of organizations under the umbrella banner of As You Sow. They file anywhere between 300, 400, 500 resolutions on their pet projects every single year. That's a lot of liberal voices influencing corporate action. And it's the SEIU. It's the Teamsters. It's asset managers such as Walden Asset Management and Trillium Asset Management. But it's also state pension funds in far left states like California and New York and in cities like Philadelphia that get behind these measures as well. And then, of course, there's the original activists like the PETAs and the Greenpeaces of the world. They all work in concert together to push their shareholder initiatives. And let me tell you, it's scary, Kevin. They are wildly effective.
No, they are being wildly effective, and yet that's not what investors want. I saw a poll from the Money Management Institute, and it talked about the top values. What do investors want? Yeah, they have environmental protection, human rights, social justice. Those things are here, which would be diversity and sustainable corporate practices, but they are way down the list compared to the top two, which are family and my country, which is euphemistic for patriotism. They're talking about pro-America and pro-family. Are you seeing those shareholder proposals show up?
Yeah, right. The landscape is ridiculous, right? We're outnumbered 50 to 1 from activist groups on the left that are engaged in this process. And again, they're wildly successful. This shareholder season is nearly complete for voting. There's a few outstanding meetings left. But they've already broken their own record. 19 shareholder proposals have gotten over 50%. And that may not sound like a lot if folks are uneducated on this, but first of all, that's a record. The previous record was only 14. Second of all, I've been doing this for a decade, and I can tell you, if you get 10% of the vote, that's a huge number because so many shares are closely held by founders such as Mark Zuckerberg at Facebook, Jeff Bezos at Amazon. And so the fact that basically every other investor is voting, and I'm using air quotes when I say that because we'll talk about it soon, I hope, but the vote is rigged. Okay, this is a rigged vote where your values are not being voted in what you believe. And so again, you're investing in lots of companies, folks, that are offending your values because of a rigged proxy vote that you don't even know is going on. And we need to get Americans and investment managers engaged in this process in a much more meaningful way.
Well, I'll tell you, ESG is the hottest thing in the investment industry. There at the start of the year, there was something like $40 trillion worldwide invested according to ESG principles. And there's one, BlackRock, with $7 trillion here in the United States alone. And BlackRock, headed by Larry Fink, is the largest asset manager. And the government just turned to them in part of the rescue package that they put together for COVID and all of that. But they're talking about protecting the environment. They're talking about social justice. They're talking about proper corporate governance. Those are all buzzwords that don't have meaning to most people. Oh, that sounds good. Let's do that. But in practice, they're talking about pushing a climate agenda that is really a green movement agenda that would be very foreign to most Americans. They're talking about social justice trends that most people say, wait a minute, wait, defund the police, what? And then they're talking about corporate governance where they're mandating certain boards be comprised of all genders, not both genders, but all genders in some cases. Well, Larry Fink is famous for this, and yet Larry Fink looks like a complete hypocrite when he's talking about China. Tell us about BlackRock and their investments in China and why it's so hypocritical.
Well, just think about operations in China, right? First of all, you know, the Chinese companies that Larry Fink is investing in, they have no environmental stewardship. They have no good governance, right? And so while he's pushing American companies to comply with extra governmental standards, which, by the way, will cost American companies money that they need to expend in the middle of a global pandemic, he's investing in China and ignoring their human rights abuses. And, you know, look, we talk about risk, right? And, you know, every investment manager will talk about risk. These companies aren't held to the same accounting standards under the SEC and the PCAOB that American companies are. And so, you know, that's how you end up with Luckin Coffee and all of the fraud that we see that every once in a while gets uncovered in China, because our American accounting practices, they don't follow because they don't have to. And that's a Biden-Obama era memorandum of understanding that we need to unring the bell on. And Fink is a wild hypocrite for engaging in this. And let's just talk about ESG in general anyway. One of the largest held companies in ESG funds in America is Apple. How's their environmental record doing in China? Let's just talk about that. They're fleecing. They're fleecing a lot of ignorant liberals.
I want to get to a piece of good news, though. You were working with the Trump administration, the Labor Secretary Scalia. He just recently issued guidance. When we come back from the break, I'm going to ask you to tell about the good news that we had from Secretary Scalia and how it does mean, for the first time in a long time, that we've actually made a difference and are actually see a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. We'll come back with an action plan. Well, Justin, before the break, we talked about the recent win that we had with the Department of Labor and with the Secretary Scalia. Can you tell us what that was and how impactful it could be?
It's very impactful. Under ERISA, what Secretary Scalia has put out is a notice of proposed rulemaking that would remind fund managers that they have a sole obligation to look out for the fiduciary interest of their pensioners, and specifically that ESG poses a risk to them upholding that singular mandate. He wrote a beautiful article in the Wall Street Journal in which he said that the Trump sole duty of these managers is a social good, a single social good, and that is to look out for the fiduciary interests of retirees. And that's just a great way to put it, that indeed that is a social good, and the Trump administration and Secretary Scalia deserve a lot of support for this. It's a proposed rulemaking, so folks that believe in this can have a comment put in the notice and comment period, and I highly recommend that folks do that.
That's great. Well, let's talk that action plan other than that comment, and we'll put in our battle plan how you can make those comments and you can support the idea of investing your pension dollars to get you a good return, as opposed to some idea that somebody has, well, I want to do this social thing or that social thing. But there are other practical things that investors can do. So tell us some of the things that an investor can do to make certain their money is invested to support their values.
Yeah, sure. So at the Free Enterprise Project, we developed for the first time this year what we call the Investor Value Voter Guide. I highly recommend it. Come to nationalcenter.org. What we do is we break down the worst of the worst liberal resolutions and show that not only will they not make the companies more money, they'll in fact cost business at the end of the day. So I highly recommend that. And I highly recommend that well, first of all, investors should be contacting their fund managers to find out how they're voting on their behalf, right? So that's an important step to say, are you voting for these ESG resolutions? And if you are, stop it, right? And if you're a fund manager, that's the next level up is to talk about the proxy advisors that you're using. So the proxy advisory service is a terrible marketplace because two terrible actors control 97% of the market. And many fund managers robo-vote along with the recommendations. The two firms are Institutional Shareholder Services and Glass Lewis. And again, these guys vote heavily in favor of far-left ESG resolutions. Oh, and by the way, they recommend no votes on all of my shareholder proposals. So it shows you, where they are. They're not looking out for the fiduciary interest of anyone.
Well, that was brilliant. The progressive left, they're playing what I think is 3D chess. Well, we're playing chutes and ladders. They were smart enough to take over these institutions. When I was doing investment management, we trusted them. But what you're telling me is we can no longer trust them. You see, everybody gets these things. This is, if you're a shareholder, you get these proxy ballots, and there are votes, and you get to vote for your directors, you get to vote for director-led proposals and shareholder proposals. So this one says on the outset, it says, vote, your investment, your vote, your choice. That should be true. But unfortunately, you've not been taught how to make it true, how to make it your voice, or what to do about it. Justin has just shared with you how you can start to make a difference and start looking at these, and they're going to give you information. Tell us where investors can get good information. Are there other services like Second Vote or others that you can suggest that people look at?
Yeah, Second Vote is wonderful. They have a whole list of values that would align with conservatism, traditionalism, freedom, liberty, and you can look at a company and they're scored on numerous different levels, including issues like religious freedom, the Second Amendment. So if you have an issue that you're passionate about in the culture wars that we're in, Second Vote provides a great resource for that. And if you're a fund manager, call up your ISS or Glass Lewis representative and say, what are you doing? Why would you support a shareholder proposal at Chevron that 53% of the voters just voted for, demanding that Chevron align its lobbying policies with the Paris Climate Accord? That's insane. The U.S. is pulling out of that. Trump is so right to do so. But now Chevron has to align its policies because of a far-left environmental shareholder resolution. And Larry Fink and BlackRock supported that resolution, by the way, which again goes to show you he is putting the screws on American companies in the middle of a pandemic, and it's shameful.
It is shameful. Well, you can learn more at secondvote.com, but you can also learn more from the Free Enterprise Project. So, Justin, take a minute and tell us about your Free Enterprise Project and what you're doing and how people can learn more about that.
Yeah, so come to nationalcenter.org. You can check me out on Twitter at DanHoffJustin, and just reach out to us, engage with us. We've been in this battle for a decade, filing resolutions that support the values that you believe in, and we're in an uphill fight because the vote is rigged for these shareholder proposals. By the way, Congress needs to step in and do something about that, but that should be a show for another day. Come and look at the shareholder resolutions that we're filing. If you see bad corporate actors, there are so many out there, we can't follow them all. Let us know what you see. If you're suffering from viewpoint discrimination at your corporation, let us know that. We know it's rampant in places like Silicon Valley, but it's not just there. It's all across industry, especially in far-left media as well. And so, yeah, just come to nationalcenter.org, reach out to us on social media, and engage with us. We're happy to talk to investors, we're happy to talk to fund managers, and we're happy to talk to folks that just want to retire someday and don't want companies getting all involved in these political and cultural battles to start with.
Well, we're going to invite you, Justin, to come and train our financial advisors in our training program at Liberty University. It's the National Security Investment Consultant Institute. If you have an advisor and you want them to learn more, give us their name, economicwarroom.com/advisor. Justin, you're doing great work. Thank you so much for all you're doing.
Thanks, Kevin.
All right, it is the small ships that make the big difference. We talk about it all the time. It was true at Dunkirk. It's true today. This is the battle we're facing today, and it's existential for your money and your way of life. There are corporations that are taking your money and using it against you. If you own shares of stock, you have a vote. It may be hidden from you. They don't want you to know about it, but it's very powerful. And if you learn how to deal with this, you can make a big difference. The companies you own should not be working against your values. You need to get educated. You can get a free battle plan at economicwarroom.com. I want you to remember, what we see as a marketplace, we think it's just investing. Our enemies see as a battle space, and they've been using your money against you. Don't forget that. Get your battle plan and get active. This is Kevin Freeman from the Economic War Room.